Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack. He was found at his home in Memphis, not breathing.
For 3 weeks in 1977, his body told a story nobody wanted to print. Scientists going back through his final medical imaging found something the original report never fully explained. Not one cause of death. A collapse. Years in the making, written into his bones and his organs long before his heart finally gave out. The official record called it simple. The X-rays say otherwise. Join us as we reveal what they actually show and why the full picture took decades to come into focus. The report that came too fast.
I have here the toxicology report, which shows there are a staggering 9 different prescription drugs in Elvis's body at the time of his death.
August 17th, 1977 was one day after Elvis Presley's death. The autopsy was already finished. Speed like that raises questions on its own. A man found dead under unclear circumstances, examined, tested, and explained within 24 hours. Dr. Jerry Francisco, the Shelby County medical examiner, stood in front of reporters that same afternoon and gave the world an answer. Cardiac arrhythmia, a sudden, fatal disruption of the heart's rhythm. Nothing more specific, nothing about medication, nothing about the dozens of pills found in his system. The press conference lasted only minutes. The certainty in it did not match the complexity of what pathologists actually found on the table that morning. Behind the scenes, the picture looked very different. The autopsy team at Baptist Memorial Hospital included multiple specialists, not just Francisco. Toxicology samples were sent out for deeper analysis almost immediately, because something in the body did not add up to a simple, isolated heart event. Doctors involved in the procedure later described tension in the room. Some wanted to wait for full toxicology before announcing anything to the public. Francisco did not wait. He told the press the death was natural, full stop, before the lab work even came back. This decision still gets debated by medical historians today. Some defend it as standard practice for the time, a medical examiner giving a preliminary, plausible explanation, while testing continued quietly in the background. Others call it something closer to damage control, a fast, clean answer designed to protect a city, a family, and an industry built entirely around one man's image. The full toxicology results arrived weeks later. They told a far messier story. 14 different substances were found in his system. Some were sedatives, some were painkillers, some were stimulants prescribed to counteract the sedation, creating a chemical cycle that had likely been running for years. The quantities involved were significant enough that several pathologists who reviewed the data afterward concluded the drug combination played a direct role in his death, not as a footnote, but as the actual mechanism. This contradicted the official cause of death almost entirely. Dr. George Nicopolis, his personal physician for most of the decade, became the center of the storm. Records later showed he had prescribed an extraordinary volume of medication in Presley's final 20 months alone. Thousands of doses, sedatives, amphetamines, painkillers, sleep aids, often in combinations that specialists outside his circle considered dangerous on their own merits, let alone together. Nicopolis defended his prescribing pattern publicly. He argued he was managing a patient with chronic pain, insomnia, and the physical demands of a brutal touring schedule. He argued that abrupt withdrawal carried its own serious risks. Some of that argument held medical merit. Doses for chronic patients do require careful management. But the sheer scale of what was prescribed went well beyond standard management, according to outside reviewers who examined the same records years later. The mismatch between the press conference and the lab results created an immediate credibility gap. Reporters who had accepted Francisco's quick announcement began digging once the toxicology numbers leaked. Memphis newspapers ran competing headlines within the same month, some defending the official ruling, others openly questioning it. Family members close to the situation found themselves caught in the middle. Vernon Presley, already grieving the loss of his only child, now faced a public argument over whether that child's death had been mishandled, medically and administratively, in the rush to close the story. The funeral happened regardless of the unresolved questions. Thousands lined the streets of Memphis. The official cause of death, cardiac arrhythmia, simple and final, was what most of the world carried home from the television coverage that week. But inside hospitals, inside medical examiner offices, inside the small circle of doctors who had actually seen the toxicology numbers, a different conversation was already underway. One that would not fully surface for years, and one that the original X-rays taken during the autopsy itself would later become central to. Those X-rays sat in storage for decades. Most of the public never knew detailed skeletal and organ imaging existed at all beyond the toxicology report. The story most people learned was the one read aloud at that first press conference, less than 24 hours after his body was found. Simple, clean, and final. The imaging told a longer story. A story about years of strain accumulating quietly inside a body the world believed was simply tired. That story starts further back than anyone realized in 1977. It starts 2 years earlier, inside a hospital room most fans never heard about. The hospital's stay nobody talked about.
He'd take sleeping pills, but then he'd start taking too many of them. And then when he woke up the next day, he'd have to take pills to wake up.
January 1975. Elvis Presley checked into Baptist Memorial Hospital for nearly 3 weeks. The public explanation was simple: exhaustion. A grueling tour schedule finally catching up with him. The internal medical picture told a more complicated story. Doctors admitted him with what records later described as a combination of issues. An enlarged colon, a condition that had quietly worsened for years, partly tied to chronic constipation caused by long-term medication use. A liver under visible strain, showing signs of damage consistent with sustained drug exposure rather than a single isolated event. Doctors also noted early signs of hypertension, his blood pressure running higher than expected for a man his age. None of this matched the version released to fans waiting outside the hospital gates. Imaging taken during that admission, reviewed years later by independent specialists, showed something striking. His colon had become significantly enlarged, a condition called megacolon, often linked to years of chronic constipation from heavy opioid and sedative use. This was not a minor footnote. Severe cases of this condition can become life-threatening on their own, independent of anything else happening in the body. At the time, this information stayed almost entirely inside the hospital. Press releases focused on rest and recovery. The word exhaustion did a great deal of work covering territory that was, medically, far more serious. Doctors treating him that month faced a difficult balance: address the physical damage already done, while managing a patient who depended heavily on the very medications causing much of that damage. Sedatives helped him sleep. Painkillers helped him perform through old injuries and exhaustion. Removing them carried its own risks. Continuing them deepened the damage already visible on his charts. This created a medical trap that would define the next 2.5 years of his life. He left the hospital in late January, publicly described as rested and ready to return to work. Privately, doctors had documented organ stress significant enough to flag for ongoing monitoring. That monitoring, according to records reviewed afterward, became inconsistent almost immediately once he returned to touring. By later that year, additional health concerns emerged. Vision problems linked to glaucoma began affecting him, adding another layer of medication to an already complex regimen. Eye drops, oral treatments, additional prescriptions stacking onto a system already struggling to process what it was given. Friends and staff close to him during this period noticed physical changes accelerating: swelling, fatigue that did not improve with rest, periods of confusion that worried people around him enough to mention it privately, though rarely outside their small circle. A second hospital stay followed in 1975 alone. A detail many casual accounts of his life skip entirely. The pattern was becoming clear to the people closest to him, even if the public version stayed simple. A man who needed real medical intervention was instead receiving repeated short-term stabilization, then returning immediately to the demands that had caused the damage in the first place. Dr. Nikopoulos, his primary physician through this period, found himself managing an increasingly difficult patient. Presley resisted significant changes to his medication routine. He had grown dependent, both physically and psychologically, on the predictability of his regimen. Adjusting it meant confronting withdrawal symptoms, sleeplessness, and discomfort that he was, by most accounts, unwilling to tolerate for long. This resistance created a dynamic many addiction specialists would recognize instantly, even decades later, reviewing the same records. a patient unwilling to change, a physician unwilling, or perhaps unable, to force the issue against a man with enormous resources, fame, and the ability to simply find another doctor if pushed too hard. The body kept the records that the press releases did not. By the end of 1975, imaging would have shown a liver under continued strain, a colon still struggling with chronic dysfunction, and a cardiovascular system absorbing the cumulative weight of stimulants and sedatives cycling through it for years. None of this reached the public in real time. Fans saw concert posters. Fans saw Las Vegas marquees. Fans saw a man who still, by every outward measure, looked like the most famous performer alive. The body underneath that image had already started keeping score. 2 more years remained before that score would finally come due. 2 more years of touring, of medication, of organs absorbing damage that no stage light could reveal to an audience watching from the seats. The next chapter of his medical story would not be told through interviews or press releases. It would be told through the imaging itself, the skeleton, the bones, the quiet, physical record of exactly what years of this cycle had done to a 40-year-old man's body. What the bones remembered skeletal, imaging from his final years, reveals something most fans never expected. A 42-year-old man with the bone density of someone decades older. This detail surfaced gradually, pieced together by researchers who examined his medical history long after his death. Bone density naturally declines with age, but the rate and pattern found in his case stood out. Years of reduced physical activity outside of performance, combined with long-term steroid and medication use, had accelerated the process significantly. Performing still demanded enormous physical output. 2-hour shows, karate-style choreography built into his stage routine, costume changes under hot lights, night after night. But the time between shows told a different story. Long stretches of inactivity, days spent largely in bed or seated, a stark contrast to the explosive energy audiences saw on stage. This contrast created a unique kind of damage. A body pushed to extremes during performance, then left dormant for days at a time with little structured recovery or conditioning in between. Joints absorbed repeated stress without adequate support. His knees and lower back showed wear consistent with this pattern, the kind specialists associate with high-impact athletes well past their prime, not with rest and recovery. Imaging also revealed early signs of arthritis, particularly in his hips and spine, conditions typically seen in men 20 years older. Doctors who reviewed these findings years later noted this likely contributed to his reliance on pain medication in the first place, creating another layer in an already complicated cycle. Pain led to medication. Medication led to inactivity. Inactivity worsened the very conditions causing the pain. One detail stands out among medical reviewers studying this period. His jaw and dental records, cross-referenced with imaging from his final dental visit just hours before his death, showed no immediate red flags. This detail mattered later, ruling out certain theories that circulated for years about hidden trauma or injury contributing to his final hours. Whatever was happening inside his body, it was not the result of any sudden injury or external event. The skeleton told a story of slow accumulation, not sudden catastrophe. Spinal imaging specifically showed compression consistent with both age-related decline and the physical toll of his performance style. Years of dramatic stage movements, dropping to one knee, twisting suddenly during songs, had left measurable wear. Most fans watching from concert seats could never have guessed existed beneath the costume. Researchers examining this data decades later described it as a body fighting 2 different battles simultaneously. One battle visible on stage, full of energy and command. Another invisible battle happening internally, where years of strain had quietly outpaced his body's ability to recover. This is where the bones and the toxicology reports begin to connect. The same medications keeping him functional through pain and exhaustion were also contributing to the very deterioration making that pain worse in the first place. A cycle with no clean exit, one that had been running, by this point, for the better part of 7 years. By mid-1977, those closest to him could see the physical toll without needing imaging to confirm it. Reduced mobility, visible discomfort during simple movements, a noticeable change in how carefully he moved through his own home. The bones do not lie, even when everything else around a story does. What they revealed was not a man suddenly struck down. It was a man whose body had been absorbing damage for years, quietly, beneath a public image that never once let the audience see it happening. The organs told an even more urgent part of that same story. The heart under siege. The Toxicology report from August of 1977 listed 14 substances in his system. But the deeper story sits in what those substances were doing to one organ specifically, his heart. Cardiologists who reviewed his medical history later described a heart under sustained chemical pressure for years, not hours. Stimulants used to counteract sedation forced his cardiovascular system into repeated cycles of acceleration and crash. Up, then down, then up again, day after day, for the better part of a decade. This pattern leaves a mark. Specialists studying similar long-term medication patterns in other patients describe a thickening of the heart muscle over time, the organ working harder than it should simply to keep pace with chemical demands placed on it artificially. Imaging from his final years, while not originally framed this way in 1977, shows signs consistent with exactly this kind of strain. His heart had enlarged. Cardiomegaly, the medical term, was noted during the original autopsy, but received relatively little public attention compared to the toxicology numbers. An enlarged heart often signals the organ compensating for chronic stress, working overtime for years to manage a workload it was never designed to sustain. Combine an enlarged, overworked heart with 14 different substances circulating simultaneously, several of them directly affecting heart rhythm, and the official explanation, cardiac arrhythmia, starts to look less like a mysterious, sudden event and more like an outcome that had been building for years. Dr. Nikopoulos always maintained he was managing legitimate medical needs, chronic pain, insomnia severe enough to threaten his ability to perform, anxiety tied to the immense pressure of his career and public image. These were real conditions, not fabrications. But the volume and combination of treatments prescribed for them created a separate, parallel danger that may have ultimately outweighed whatever relief they provided. Records show that in the final 20 months of his life alone, Nikopoulos had prescribed thousands of doses across dozens of different medications. Some specialists who reviewed these prescribing patterns afterward described it less as treatment and more as a slow, unintentional poisoning, carried out one prescription at a time, never with harmful intent, but with consequences just as real. The liver, already documented as under strain back in 1975, had continued absorbing damage in the 2 years since. By the time of his death, pathologists noted visible signs of impairment consistent with years of medication processing far beyond what a healthy liver could comfortably manage. This created a dangerous feedback loop cardiologists later identified clearly. A struggling liver processes medication less efficiently. Less efficient processing means substances stay active in the bloodstream longer than intended. Longer activity means greater cumulative effect on the heart and nervous system, particularly during sleep, when breathing and heart rate naturally slow already. The night of August the 15th followed this exact pattern, sedatives taken to help him sleep. Combined with a body already struggling to clear medication efficiently, combined with a heart already enlarged and under chronic stress, each factor alone might have been manageable. Together, in the early hours of that morning, they were not. Some medical reviewers who examined this case in later decades described his death less as a single moment and more as the final entry in a long medical record that had been quietly warning of this outcome for years. The 14 substances found in his system were not an isolated incident. They were a pattern that had simply, finally, run its course. This is the piece that the original press conference in 1977 never addressed. Dr. Francisco's swift announcement of cardiac arrhythmia was technically accurate as a description of what physically happened in his final moments. His heart stopped beating in a normal rhythm, but the announcement gave no indication of why. No mention of the years of accumulated strain, no mention of the chemical burden that had pushed an already compromised organ past its limit. The full picture only emerged gradually through toxicology reviews, through medical historians piecing together hospital records from 1975 onward, through specialists examining imaging that had sat largely unexamined by the public for years. What it revealed was not a conspiracy in the traditional sense, no single villain, no deliberate cover-up designed to deceive the world. Instead, a slower, more uncomfortable truth, a system of doctors, management, and an industry built around his image, all making individually understandable decisions that combined into something none of them fully controlled. Dr. Nicopolis wanted to help a patient in genuine pain. Presley wanted relief from exhaustion and discomfort that came with the life he had built. Neither one, by most accounts, set out to cause what ultimately happened. But the heart does not measure intention. It only measures strain. And by August of 1977, his heart had absorbed all the strain it could carry. What happened next was not really a mystery to the doctors who had been watching closely enough. It was, for some of them, a question of when, not if. The doctor on trial. 4 years after Elvis Presley's death, his physician stood in a Memphis courtroom. Dr. George Nicopolis faced 14 counts related to overprescribing controlled substances, not just to Presley, but to other patients as well. The trial, held in 1981, became one of the most closely watched medical cases in Tennessee history, dragging the private details of Presley's final years into full public view for the first time. The courtroom on the opening day was packed. Reporters from across the country filled the gallery, alongside curious Memphis residents who had lined up before dawn for a seat. Photographers waited outside on the courthouse steps, cameras ready for the moment Nicopolis arrived. He walked in wearing a dark suit, flanked by his attorneys, saying nothing to the assembled press. Prosecutors presented prescription records that stunned even seasoned courtroom observers. In the final 20 months of Presley's life alone, Nicopolis had prescribed over 10,000 doses of sedatives, stimulants, and painkillers. The exact figures, read aloud in court, drew audible reactions from the gallery. Sedatives by the hundreds. Amphetamines prescribed in patterns prosecutors described as medically indefensible. Painkillers stacked on top of both, often within the same week. The sheer volume formed the foundation of the state's case. No legitimate medical need, prosecutors argued, could justify numbers that large for a single patient. One prosecutor told the jury directly that the prescription pad had effectively become a weapon, even if nobody intended it that way. The defense told a different story. Nicopolis argued he was managing a patient whose fame made traditional medical boundaries nearly impossible to enforce. Presley could simply find another doctor if pushed too hard, or worse, obtain medication through channels with no oversight at all. Keeping him under one physician's care, the defense argued, was actually the safer option, even if that care looked excessive on paper. Nicopolis took the stand himself during the trial, an appearance many observers considered the turning point of the entire case. He described long nights at Graceland, sitting with Presley through bouts of insomnia that stretched for days. He described a patient terrified of withdrawal, someone who associated any reduction in medication with physical collapse, panic, and an inability to perform. He spoke about trying repeatedly, in his own words, to taper doses gradually, only to face resistance fierce enough that he worried Presley would seek medication elsewhere, from sources with no medical oversight whatsoever. Whether jurors found this account convincing became central to the entire deliberation. Witnesses for the defense included other doctors who testified that touring performers, particularly ones logging Presley's grueling schedule, often required aggressive pain and sleep management that looked alarming outside the context of that lifestyle. One physician testified that performers operating on Presley's level frequently received treatment regimens civilian patients would never be prescribed simply because the physical and psychological demands of that career differed so dramatically from ordinary life. Prosecutors countered with their own medical experts, doctors who reviewed the same prescription logs and reached a starkly different conclusion. They argued no touring schedule, regardless of its demands, could medically justify the specific combinations documented in Presley's case. Several specifically pointed to the practice of prescribing stimulants to offset sedatives, then more sedatives to offset the stimulants, calling it a dangerous cycle with no real precedent in legitimate pain management. The jury deliberated for several days, a length of time that surprised many following the case closely, given the volume of damaging prescription evidence presented. In the end, Nicopolis was acquitted on all charges related to Presley's care specifically, though the broader scrutiny of his practice continued. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners later suspended his medical license for a period, a separate process from the criminal trial, reflecting ongoing concerns about his prescribing patterns overall. Reaction to the verdict split almost immediately along predictable lines. Some legal analysts pointed out that criminal cases require proof beyond reasonable doubt, a much higher bar than simply showing questionable medical judgment. Showing that prescriptions were excessive was not the same as proving criminal intent to harm. The verdict satisfied almost no one completely. Fans who believed Presley had been failed by the very system meant to protect him saw the acquittal as further evidence that accountability had quietly slipped through the cracks. Others saw it as a fair recognition that medicine, especially around chronic pain and addiction, rarely offers clean villains or simple answers. Local Memphis newspapers ran starkly different editorials within days of each other. One argued the verdict represented justice properly applied, given the genuinely difficult circumstances Nicopolis faced as Presley's physician. Another argued the trial had simply confirmed what many already suspected, that fame and money could shield even the most reckless medical decisions from real consequence. Vernon Presley, watching the trial unfold before his own death in 1979, never lived to see its conclusion. Other family members who did watch it close described mixed feelings: relief that no single person was formally blamed, frustration that no clear resolution emerged about how exactly this had been allowed to happen for so long. Priscilla Presley, asked about the trial years later in interviews, described it as painful to watch unfold publicly. Every private detail of those final years suddenly available for strangers to debate and dissect. She noted that regardless of the verdict, nothing about the trial brought back what had already been lost. The trial did accomplish one significant thing, regardless of its outcome. It forced the toxicology numbers, the prescription volumes, and the medical records from 1975 onward into public record permanently. What had stayed largely contained within hospital walls and private physician files for years became part of the historical record, available for researchers and medical historians to study for decades afterward. This is where the imaging data, the bone density findings, the cardiac strain indicators eventually found their way into broader analysis. Researchers studying addiction medicine, celebrity health crises, and long-term medication dependency began referencing Presley's case specifically, using the detailed records made public through the trial as a uniquely thorough case study. Dr. Nicopolis continued practicing medicine for years after the trial, eventually losing his license permanently in 1995, following separate prescribing concerns unrelated to Presley. He maintained until his death that he had done everything he believed was right for a patient he considered a friend, not just a client. In later interviews, he described Presley not as a case file, but as someone he genuinely cared about, a friendship that complicated every medical decision he made during those final years. Whether that belief excused the outcome remained, and still remains, a genuinely contested question among medical ethicists who study the case. What the trial made undeniable was this: the version of events given to the public on August 17, 1977, cardiac arrhythmia, simple and complete, was never the full story. It was the version available within 24 hours, before toxicology, before imaging review, before a courtroom forced every detail into daylight. The real story took 4 years to reach a courtroom, and decades more to reach full public understanding. The legacy of that gap is still being written today. What the findings actually change. Decades after his death, researchers revisiting his complete medical record reached a conclusion that the original 1977 press conference never offered. There was no single cause of death. There was an accumulation. This distinction matters more than it might first appear. A single cause suggests a moment, isolated and unpredictable, something that could not have been foreseen or prevented. An accumulation suggests something else entirely. A slow collapse, visible in pieces for years, missed not because the warning signs were absent, but because nobody pulled every piece of evidence into one place until it was far too late to matter. The bone density data showed a man aging internally far faster than his calendar years suggested. Researchers comparing his skeletal imaging to standard medical charts found markers more typical of men in their 60s, not someone 6 weeks shy of his 43rd birthday. The cardiac imaging showed a heart enlarged and overworked, absorbing chemical stress for the better part of a decade. The liver records showed an organ struggling to process medication efficiently as far back as 1975. The toxicology report from his final hours showed 14 substances acting simultaneously on a body already compromised in nearly every major system. None of these findings, viewed individually, were secret. Doctors at Baptist Memorial Hospital knew about the colon issues in 1975. Dr. Nikopoulos knew the volume of medication he was prescribing. The medical examiner's office knew the toxicology results within weeks of the autopsy, even if the public announcement came faster than the full picture. What changed decades later was the willingness to assemble those pieces honestly, without the protective instinct that shaped the original 1977 response. Researchers studying the case today are not bound by the same pressures that existed in that Memphis courtroom of public opinion in the days immediately following his death. A grieving city, a grieving family, an industry with enormous financial interest in protecting his image even in death. That pressure shaped the speed of the original announcement. It likely shaped its simplicity as well. Consider the timeline carefully. Less than 24 hours between death and a public cause. Weeks before full toxicology confirmed 14 substances. Years before the colon, liver, and cardiac findings from earlier hospital stays connected clearly to that final outcome. 4 years before, a courtroom forced the prescription volume into public record. Decades before, medical historians assembled bone density, cardiac strain, and liver function into one continuous narrative. Each gap in that timeline allowed a slightly different version of events to take hold in public memory. The version most people carry today, even now, traces back almost entirely to the first 24-hour window. The fuller picture that emerged over the following decades does not paint anyone as a clear villain. Dr. Nikopoulos was not portrayed by later researchers as a man who intended harm. Presley himself was not portrayed as reckless in any simple sense, but as a man managing real pain and real exhaustion using the tools available to him. Tools that happened to come with consequences nobody fully tracked until it was too late. The real conclusion researchers draw today is structural, not personal. A system built around protecting one man's image, his touring schedule, and the enormous business interests surrounding him, created conditions where warning signs could be individually acknowledged, but never meaningfully addressed as a whole. Each doctor saw a piece, each hospital stay produced a report, each prescription got filled, but nobody, across years of fragmented care, ever stepped back and looked at the entire pattern until a courtroom forced it into daylight in 1981. This is, in many ways, the most uncomfortable part of the story. It was not a conspiracy hiding the truth. It was simply nobody assembling the truth in time. The x-rays, the bone scans, the cardiac measurements sat scattered across different files, different hospital systems, different points in time, each one quietly accurate. None of them connected until medical historians did that work decades after it could have changed anything. Some researchers studying the case have drawn comparisons to other instances of fragmented medical care among high-profile patients, where wealth and access paradoxically worked against thorough treatment. Multiple doctors, multiple specialists, multiple prescriptions, but no single physician ever holding the complete picture at once. Presley's case, they argue, became one of the clearest documented examples of exactly this failure, precisely because so much of his medical history eventually became public record through the trial. This matters beyond Presley's individual story. Addiction specialists and medical ethicists studying his case today often use it as a teaching example, precisely because it demonstrates how fragmented care, even well-intentioned care, can fail to catch a pattern that becomes obvious only in hindsight. Medical schools have referenced his case specifically when teaching about the dangers of treating high-profile or wealthy patients differently than ordinary ones, where deference to status can quietly override standard medical caution. For fans, the findings reshape the narrative in a different way. Not a story about a man brought down by enemies, scandal, or sudden tragedy. A story about a man whose body kept honest records his public image never allowed the world to see. The concert posters showed energy and command. The imaging showed years of quiet, accumulating strain underneath. Both were true at the same time. That contradiction, more than any single test result, is what makes his case continue to draw attention from researchers and fans alike, even decades later. Consider the final months of his life again, knowing what the imaging later confirmed. The same man who filled arenas in June of 1977, performing for nearly 2 hours a night, was carrying a skeletal system researchers later compared to a man 20 years older. The same heart absorbing the demands of choreography and breath control on stage was already enlarged, already straining, months before it finally gave out in that bathroom in Memphis. Audiences had no way of knowing this. The official record still lists cardiac arrhythmia as his cause of death. Technically, that remains accurate. His heart did stop. But the fuller record, the one assembled slowly across the years that followed, makes clear that explanation was always the beginning of the story, not the end of it. What started as a 14-drug toxicology report and a same-day press conference became, over decades, one of the most thoroughly documented medical case studies of its kind. Every scan, prescription record, and hospital stay eventually told the same story the public did not get to hear in 1977. A body had been sending warnings for years. Almost nobody had been positioned to hear all of them at once. The records are public now, and the picture is finally complete. Elvis Presley's death was not a single mystery. It was years of strain, finally surfacing all at once.